TPP is one of the biggest trade deals in human history. Although the text of the TPP was ready in November last year, it was signed on February 4th in New Zealand by 12 Pacific Rim countries. These countries are Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, the United States and Vietnam. Together these countries represent 40% of the world's GDP and 26% of world trade. Well, TPP seeks to break down barriers for trade and investment in the 12 signatory countries. Most people say that it is more investment oriented in the sense that the TPP seeks to protect transnational investment and facilitates transnational investment. If it promotes trade, it is through the investment route. It also seeks to bring in uniformity in regulations, environmental protection laws, labor laws, intellectual property rights across the signatory countries. And because the countries are at different levels of development, it allows a certain leeway, a time period for various countries to bring their regulations and their systems on a par with that of the desirable ones. No, it hasn't come into force. It's been signed, but it needs to be ratified by the parliaments of the signatory countries over a period of 2 years. However, within these 2 years, if 6 countries ratify it, then it will come into being. But additionally, these 6 countries must represent 85% of the total GDP of the 12 signatories. What this means is that unless the US and Japan, which together account for 80% of the GDP of these 12 countries, unless both of them ratify the deal becomes infructuous. People are worried about the future of the deal because in the United States it comes at the middle of a presidential election year and major candidates have opposed the deal. A Republican candidate, Donald Trump, has criticized the deal, and from the Democratic side, Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton both have opposed the deal. However, President Obama has given a fast-track authority to US Congress, which means the Congress can either approve it as a whole or reject it. No modifications are possible. However, most people believe that given the interests of American transnational corporations, the deal will get ratified, even though there might be a few hitches on the way. Well, its critics largely in America say that this will lead to offshoring of US jobs, that is, US jobs being moved to other countries who have signed the deal. They also say that this would lead to an increase in the price of medicines because pharmaceutical companies will use the strict intellectual property rights laws of TPP to prevent generic drugs from coming to the market, which means only the branded drugs will be sold, which are highly priced. They also say that it will bring down wages, it will lead to income inequalities, and they also say that this whole deal has been negotiated in secrecy and the electorate in none of the 12 countries were taken into confidence. However, those who negotiated the deal said that people were not taken into confidence because nothing had been agreed upon. However, what has been agreed upon has not been adequately discussed in public. The only way of legitimizing the deal now will be ratification by the national legislatures. Another important thing about this deal is private companies will be able to sue national governments if national policies lead to these companies making losses. However, these companies will not be domestic companies, these will be transnational companies. So in the field of health, education or protection granted to certain industries, foreign companies can sue national governments if they make losses. The only exception that has been made is for tobacco companies. Tobacco companies cannot sue for losses because of government policies. Well, China is a Pacific Rim country and should have been part of the agreement. The critics of the deal say that the US wanted TPP largely to isolate China, and some of them fear that there might be the beginning of a Cold War in the economic sense between the US and China. However, that seems unlikely because both are very deeply economically engaged, but it remains a fact that TPP is being seen as rebalancing act by America in the Asia Pacific. As for China, China has given this deal a cautious welcome. It's equally true that China could not have joined TPP as of now. Its ownership structures of state-owned enterprises, its labor laws, its intellectual property rights laws, its environmental laws would all have to change and be transformed for it to even make an application to join the TPP. However, this does not rule out China applying to join the TPP later. Several other countries will join. South Korea was already part of the negotiations. India was invited when Joe Biden came to India last year to participate in TPP, but for a variety of reasons we could not. We also cannot join TPP for the same reasons as China, because our laws currently and our structures of ownership, our intellectual property rights regime does not even conform to the WTO system, leave alone the system that TPP is putting in place. But over time, you will see many other countries joining the TPP.